Chapter 28 September 1988, Shanghai. John's speech was a roaring success. In response, the women in the fellowship had been outspoken and active, demonstrating both astute knowledge and burning curiosity about the world, especially modern American science and technology. Half an hour after his talk had officially ended, he was still being bombarded with questions. Zoe stood against the wall of the Shanghai Science Hall, waiting for the last few stragglers to leave so she could speak to him. He was still handsome at the age of 65, his dark hair streaked with white and thin-rimmed spectacles that gave him a sophisticated, cultured, and capable air. Zoe couldn't help grinning. No wonder all these middle-aged female intellectuals were swarming around him. By the time the last of them finally gave up, Zoe and John barely had time to exchange their business cards. "No, really, I insist," John said for the third time. "It won't cost you anything. In fact, it won't even cost me anything. My meals are all on the government dime, thanks to my expense account." He had thought that finding a phone line away from the Chinese security bugs would be the hard part, but he never imagined that Zoe would refuse an invitation for dinner at a 5-star restaurant where they could dance, sit at the bar, and enjoy jazz music. "No. Is there someone else in your life who's keeping you from saying yes?" asked John, only half joking. "No, it isn't that. It's just too dangerous for me to be seen out with a foreigner. I don't want any trouble." "Then how about I come to your office?" said John, knowing she would refuse. "Oh, no, that's impossible." "Well, we have to meet somewhere." "Why? Is it necessary?" "Absolutely. We're going to celebrate." "Celebrate what?" "Knowing each other for 4 decades. And finding each other again." He gripped the phone harder as the silence stretched out, praying that patience and persistence would eventually wear down her shyness and worry. The longer he waited, the longer it took her to answer, and the more likely she would give in. He hoped. "Say yes. Say yes. Say yes." The words throbbed in time with his beating heart. Joy at hearing his voice bubbled up from deep inside and rose to color Zoe's face in a fiery blush. Her heart raced and a shiver ran down her back. I could meet him once, only once, to explain what happened and to tell him how sorry I am for letting him down, she thought. And then he would understand and leave the past alone. His new life as a diplomat will be safe as long as I don't get involved. But every place he had suggested so far was too precarious, too exposed, too public. "Where?" she breathed, thinking aloud, but he seized on the word as an answer. "The bus stop, outside Huangpu Park, at the Bund. 7 o'clock tomorrow night." The hotel concierge had told him with a wink that the Bund was a popular meeting place for couples. Even as late as midnight, people strolling along the riverbank or through the gardens would not arouse any suspicions, even from police. "Okay, I'll meet you there." Zoe hung up the phone, wiping her sweaty palms on her skirt. She took a deep breath and felt first relief and then desire, and she blushed again at the idea of feeling young and romantic at her age. How strange to submit to the desire of another human being, whom you didn't dare to love but loved anyway, and feared to lose. For the moment, she cared for nothing but to make him happy again. Crowds streamed down the mile-long stretch of path, as fluid as the river next to it. The lights from the busy street and buildings above shimmered on the water, twisting together then unraveling like multicolored ribbons. The Bund, the symbol of a great Shanghai in its early 20th century glory, radiated historical beauty and charm. To escape notice and avoid suspicion, John waited in the shadows under a tree, becoming increasingly impatient as the minutes crept by. About 10 minutes past 7, he sucked in a quick breath when he saw Zoe step off a bus. She paused, looked around, and then walked toward the park. John darted out onto the sidewalk. "Zoe!" he called, still a few paces behind. She stopped and turned, taken aback by the wide-brimmed hat and dark glasses that obscured his face. Then the smile he so loved played across her lips. She said, "Hope you weren't waiting too long." "No, just 40 years, that's all." He drank in the sight of her, half afraid this was a dream, half ready to sweep her into his arms. Stepping closer, he caught her scent. His hand reached out of its own accord and grasped her arm. The years fell away as she tucked her little hand into the crook of his elbow. They walked slowly, just another pair of lovers, unnoticed among so many others. She marveled at the feel of his body next to hers, so natural and comfortable that it seemed as though they had never parted. However, at the sight of two patrolmen, she pulled away to put some space between them, telling herself not to be foolish. Zoe finally broke the silence. "Why did you come to China?" Sure what his answer would be, she still wanted to hear him say the words. "To find you, and tell you that I never stopped loving you." "Oh, John, you shouldn't. I don't deserve you." "No, it's not your fault. It was mine. I didn't try hard enough to find you and bring you back to America. I was too young and naive to understand the political games or know how to play to win." He stopped and turned to face her, cupping her face in his hands, gently wiping away the tears from below her eyes. "Please, give me a chance to correct my mistakes, to fix the mess I made of our lives." She shook her head. "Darling, it was me. I didn't listen to you. I insisted on coming back to China. And even though you found me now, it doesn't make any difference. I loved you so much, and still do. But things are different now. We have careers and families." John's laugh rang out in the dark. "I'm sure your career is important to you and your family too, but you don't need to worry about my family. I can wait." "You're wearing a wedding ring," she said, avoiding his eyes. "I already made enough of a mess. I couldn't bear to tear your family apart on top of that." "You worry too much." He took her hand in his and kissed it. "My wife died in a car accident. I've been a widower for almost 15 years. I kept wearing the ring because, well, never mind why. If it bothers you, I'll take it off. But before I came here, I was told that Chinese officials are much more comfortable with Western men who are married. I guess they think married men are, shall we say, less disruptive to society." He laughed again. "You know what I mean. Please, you have nothing to feel guilty about." "But you're in China, representing your government now. You shouldn't get involved with me. It's for your own good." You've been living under a dictatorial regime for too long. You see potential danger everywhere. You did, even when you came to New York. He slid his arm around her shoulders and led her to the edge of the path, looking across the Huangpu River. Neon billboards flashed their advertisements, the reflections shifting and scrolling across the surface of the water. Maybe, she shrugged, staring at the river. Like John's vision of their love, it was beautiful, but dangerously unpredictable. Then let me protect you and get you out of here, away from the danger. His grip on her shoulder tightened. Unless you've lost confidence in me. She half turned to face him, her face wet. I always had faith in you, but I lost confidence in myself. I failed you when I came back here. Then I thought someone loved me, but he abandoned me. In the end, I married a monster. You see how bad my judgment is. I'll only bring you bad luck. You should run away and stay as far away from me as you can. He put both hands on her shoulders, staring at her, his passion rising to fever pitch. Blood and desire pounded through him, and he felt heat flush his neck with the urge to kiss her. Then he caught himself. They were too old to play those games. Patience was the key. He couldn't afford to scare her away. I want you to understand something, Zoe. Neither of us can afford to get involved. But the fact is, we are involved. We began this relationship 40 years ago. And in spite of the circumstances, in spite of life, in spite of everything, here we are again. Nothing can keep us apart. Now, give me your hand. She put her hand in his. As their fingers intertwined, both felt the electric spark that ran between them. They looked into each other's eyes, as still and silent as two statues. Then he bent down and kissed her hand, his lips lingering there as long as he dared. It's getting cold. Let's find one of those floating restaurants so we can warm ourselves up. Once inside, seated at a cozy table on the upper level of the ferry, they sat in comfortable silence until the waitress served their dishes. Focusing his attention on the food, John asked, If you don't mind me asking, you said your husband was a monster? The CIA had given him just the barest outline of her background, that she was married and had an adult daughter. He was an ordinary common military officer, 20 years older than me, a war hero. At the time, everybody said how lucky I was to marry the chief commander of the Nuclear Research Compound Security Force, but I never loved him. Zoe put her cup down and gazed out at the water, watching a passing tugboat nudge a row of fishing boats. Actually, I hated him. He died of nuclear radiation poisoning. Why didn't you leave him? I was too weak. Besides, the party always has the final word. They accused me of being a Russian spy, because before him I dated a Russian nuclear expert who was helping us. Doing what? Zoe hesitated, but decided to continue her story. She wanted the man she loved to know her past before he committed to their relationship. Building nuclear bombs. He left when Chinese and Russian political ideologies shifted and the two countries became enemies. On top of that, she stared at John passionately and continued in a sad voice. I also had a bad record of dating an American spy, and I was so scared that they might bring that against me too. They accused me of being An American spy? Because in your letter, you said China invaded and divided Korea, but we were all taught to believe that China had defended our country successfully. However, I didn't know what you'd written since they intercepted our letters, so I tried to defend you at the denunciation rally. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for my letters to cause you so much trouble. John shook his head slowly. I even doubted your love at one stage. I'm so sorry. Ah, darling, please don't blame yourself. It's all my fault. She rubbed John's hands gently and continued recounting her past. She wanted John to know everything that had happened in her 4 decades of life without him, particularly the shame of being forced to use her nuclear expertise for the development of bombs. John listened without comment or criticism as she told her story, reaching across the table to hold her hand when she began to cry and waiting patiently until she was able to continue. It must have been so hard to keep up with your career and to raise your daughter by yourself, he said, full of admiration for her inner strength. She heaved a deep sigh, wiped her eyes, and looked at him with a sad wistfulness. Now that you know my history, you don't want to be with me anymore, do you? He squeezed her hand. What I want is to kiss you, but here isn't the best place for it. Let's go. They left the restaurant and began to walk toward the Shanghai mansion to hail a taxi. After they crossed the bridge and slid into the darkness of some nearby trees, he put his arm around her, pulling her into a tight embrace, and kissed her. It's all over now, darling, he whispered in her ear. I promise, nothing will hurt you anymore.